My sister smiled when the lawyer said she inherited our dad's house, but 30 seconds later, that smile vanished. Let me ask you something. What would you do if you spent years caring for someone, sacrificing your time, your career, even your personal life, only to discover that everything they owned was given to someone else? Would you fight it? Would you argue? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Or would you sit there quietly, like I did? Because 3 weeks ago, I sat in a small law office watching my older sister Rachel celebrate what she thought was the biggest win of her life. And she had no idea that the very next page of our father's will was about to destroy that moment completely. But to understand why that happened, you need to understand our family first. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old. I work as a registered nurse. I've always been the quiet one in the family. The responsible one. The one who fixes problems without making noise about it. My sister Rachel Carter is 38. She's the opposite of me in almost every way. Outgoing. Confident. The kind of person who walks into a room and instantly becomes the center of attention. Growing up, people always said the same thing about Rachel. She's going to do big things someday. And our dad, David Carter, believed that too. Not that he didn't love me. I know he did. But Rachel was always special to him. You could see it in little ways. Rachel got the bigger birthday gifts. Rachel got praised for the same things I was expected to do without recognition. If Rachel got a B in school, Dad would say she tried her best. If I got a B, he would ask why it wasn't an A. At least, that's how it felt. But life moved on. We became adults. Rachel moved to another city and built a career in marketing. I stayed closer to home and became a nurse. And for a long time, our lives rarely overlapped. Until 3 years ago. That's when our father got sick. At first it was small things. Forgetting appointments. Getting dizzy when he stood up. Struggling with everyday tasks. Then the diagnosis came. Heart failure. Suddenly the man who had spent decades fixing things around the house couldn't even walk up the stairs without stopping to breathe. And that's when everything changed. Rachel visited once after the diagnosis. Maybe twice. But visiting and helping are two very different things. Someone had to take Dad to doctor appointments. Someone had to organize medications. Someone had to cook meals and help him move around the house. Someone had to be there at 2 in the morning when he couldn't breathe and thought something was seriously wrong. That someone was me. I moved back into the house on Pine Ridge Drive. The house Dad bought in 1989. The house he spent years fixing and improving himself. The house that became the center of our lives during those last 3 years. And if you've ever taken care of someone who's sick, you know something most people don't. It's exhausting. Not just physically. Emotionally. You watch someone who used to be strong slowly lose pieces of themselves. You help them with things they're embarrassed to need help with. You become their nurse. Their assistant. Sometimes even their memory. Meanwhile, Rachel would visit every few months. Usually on a Saturday afternoon. She'd bring expensive pastries or takeout food. Stay for a couple hours. Take photos. Post them online. Family time. Then she'd leave. And every time she left, I'd go back to organizing medications, cooking dinner, and helping Dad into bed. But here's the strange part. Dad never really talked about the future. Never talked about the house. Never talked about the will. Not with me. The only time I even suspected something was happening was about 6 months before he passed away. I came home from work early one afternoon and saw a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. Inside the living room was a man in a suit. Mr. Leonard Whitaker. Our family lawyer. They were sitting at the dining table surrounded by paperwork. When Dad noticed me, he quickly stacked the papers together. Just taking care of some paperwork, he said. Simple. Casual. Like it meant nothing. And I didn't push further. Maybe I should have. Because 3 weeks ago, Rachel and I sat across from that same lawyer in his office. Dad had passed away 10 days earlier. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Rachel sat confidently with her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone while we waited for the reading to start. Then she looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. You know Dad always loved me more, right? She said it casually. Like it was obvious. Like it was fact. I didn't respond. What was the point? Then Mr. Whitaker walked in carrying a folder. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and began reading our father's will. The first few items were simple. Savings accounts, personal belongings, investments. Then he paused, looked down at the page, and said the sentence that made Rachel's smile grow wider. The family home located on Pine Ridge Drive shall be left to Rachel Carter. Rachel leaned back in her chair and laughed softly. Wow, she said. I guess that settles that. But Mr. Whitaker didn't close the folder. Instead, he slowly turned one final page and quietly said something that made the room go completely silent. There is one more section your father added, and what he read next would change everything. So let me ask you something. If someone inherits a house, but another person spent years keeping that house alive, who really earned it? That question didn't cross Rachel's mind when the lawyer read her name. But it crossed mine. Because before that moment in the lawyer's office, there were 3 long years nobody in that room seemed to remember. 3 years that looked very different depending on who you asked. And if you asked Rachel, the story would sound simple. She'd say Dad got sick. We both helped. Life moved on. But if you asked the people who actually saw what happened inside that house on Pine Ridge Drive, the story looked completely different. It started the winter Dad was diagnosed. Heart failure sounds like a technical phrase doctors throw around. But in real life it means something much simpler. Your body starts losing energy. Little by little. At first Dad just got tired easily. Walking to the mailbox made him breathe heavier than before. Then it was the stairs. Then it was standing up too quickly. Doctor visits became regular. Medication bottles multiplied on the kitchen counter. And slowly, the strong, stubborn man who built half the things in that house himself started needing help with the smallest tasks. Rachel came the first week after the diagnosis. She brought flowers, a box of expensive pastries. She hugged Dad and told him everything would be fine. She stayed about 2 hours. Then she left. And that's the difference between visiting and staying. Because after she left, the real routine began. Every morning started the same way. 6:30 a.m. I'd wake up before my shift at the hospital. Check Dad's blood pressure. Make sure he took his morning medications. Some days he felt okay. Other days he looked exhausted before the day even began. Then there were the doctor appointments. Cardiologists. Blood tests. Imaging scans. Sometimes I'd sit in waiting rooms for hours after finishing a night shift, trying not to fall asleep in the chair. But you do those things when someone needs you. You don't count the hours. At least, I didn't. And here's something interesting. When people visit sick relatives occasionally, they see the best version of that situation. The cleaned-up version. But when you live there, you see everything. The bad nights. The panic when breathing gets difficult. The moments when someone who used to fix everything suddenly asks you to open a jar because their hands are shaking. Those were the moments Rachel never saw. But someone else did. Mrs. Helen Brooks. She was our neighbor for almost 25 years. 71 years old. Sharp eyes. The kind of neighbor who notices everything happening on the street. She'd see me leaving early in the morning, coming back late at night, carrying grocery bags, helping Dad slowly walk across the yard for fresh air. One afternoon she stopped me while I was getting the mail. "Emily," she said gently, "you're doing a lot." I shrugged. It's just what needs to be done. Then she asked the question everyone eventually asked. "Does your sister help much?" And I gave the same answer every time. "She's busy." It was easier than explaining. Meanwhile, Rachel would show up every couple of months. Usually on a Saturday. She'd bring something fancy from a bakery or restaurant. Take photos with Dad on the couch. And within a couple hours, she'd be checking her watch. "Traffic's going to get bad if I don't leave soon." Then she'd hug him. Tell him to call if he needed anything. And drive away. But here's something that didn't make sense to me at the time. About 6 months before Dad died, something changed. I noticed it on a random Tuesday afternoon. I had gotten home early from a hospital shift, and there was a black sedan parked in our driveway. Inside the house, Dad was sitting at the dining table with a man wearing a gray suit. Papers were spread across the table. Documents. Envelopes. Legal-looking forms. The man stood up when I walked in. "Emily," Dad said casually, "this is Leonard Whitaker, the family lawyer." They quickly stacked the papers together. Too quickly. Like I had walked in during the middle of something private. "Just handling a few things," Dad said. I nodded. Didn't question it. But over the next few months, I noticed something else. Dad started keeping a folder in his desk drawer. Locked. Every time he opened that drawer, he made sure to close it carefully afterward. And one night, something even stranger happened. It was late. Close to midnight. I had just finished helping him take his evening medication. He looked unusually thoughtful. Like he was debating whether to say something. Then he said a sentence that didn't make much sense at the time. "Emily, not everything that looks unfair actually is." I remember laughing lightly. "Are we talking about life in general?" He didn't answer right away. Just leaned back in his chair. Then he said something else. "Sometimes people show you who they really are when something valuable is involved." I assumed he meant money. Or family conflicts. Or maybe something he'd seen happen to someone else. I didn't realize he was talking about something that hadn't happened yet. Because months later, after the hospital visits, the long nights, the medication schedules, and everything else, Dad passed away quietly in his sleep. And 10 days after that, Rachel and I sat in that lawyer's office, listening to the will. Rachel smiling as she inherited the house, laughing like the story had already ended. But she didn't know about the conversations Dad had with the lawyer. She didn't know about the documents in that locked folder. And she definitely didn't know about the section Mr. Whitaker was about to read next. Because in that quiet office, the lawyer adjusted his glasses, looked down at the final page, and said something that made Rachel stop smiling immediately. "Before ownership of the house becomes permanent, your father attached a condition." And suddenly, the story wasn't over at all. "Let me ask you something. If someone suddenly inherits a house worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, what's the first thing they usually think about? Living in it? Or selling it?" Because the moment Rachel heard the house was hers, her mind didn't go to memories. It didn't go to family history. It went straight to numbers. You could almost see the calculation happening in her head. The house on Pine Ridge Drive wasn't small. 3 bedrooms. Large backyard. Quiet neighborhood that had grown more valuable every year. Properties on our street had recently sold for close to $500,000. Rachel leaned back in her chair with a relaxed smile. "Wow," she said casually. "I didn't realize the house would be part of the will." Then she glanced at me. Not with sympathy. Not with guilt. But with that same confident look she'd had her entire life. The look that said she expected things to go her way. "I'll probably sell it," she added. "The market's really good right now." Mr. Whitaker didn't respond immediately. He was still looking at the document in front of him. Carefully. Slowly. Almost like he was making sure he read it exactly right. Rachel noticed the silence and waved her hand dismissively. "I mean, obviously we'll sort everything out later," she said. "But I'm guessing the house is the biggest asset." Still no reaction from the lawyer. Meanwhile, I sat quietly. Not because I agreed with her, but because I had already accepted something before walking into that room. I never expected to inherit the house. Rachel had always been Dad's favorite. Or at least that's how it felt growing up. So when the lawyer read her name instead of mine, part of me wasn't even surprised. Disappointed? Yes. But surprised? Not really. Still. Something about the way Mr. Whitaker was reading the document made the room feel different. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't closing the folder. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and said something that made Rachel frown slightly. "There are additional conditions attached to the transfer of the property." Rachel let out a small laugh. "Conditions?" "Yes." She leaned forward. "Like what? Taxes? Maintenance or something?" Mr. Whitaker raised a finger politely. "If I may finish reading, it will become clear." Rachel leaned back again, clearly not concerned. To her, this sounded like boring legal language. Fine print. Technical stuff. But sometimes, The fine print is the entire story. The lawyer continued reading. Your father purchased the Pine Ridge property in 1989 and maintained full ownership until his passing. Due to the personal value he placed on the home, he attached specific residency requirements to the inheritance. Rachel tilted her head. Residency requirements? Mr. Whitaker nodded. Yes. She chuckled again. That's fine. I mean, I can stay there sometimes if needed. But the lawyer shook his head slightly. Not sometimes. Now Rachel looked confused. What do you mean? The lawyer flipped the page slightly and began explaining more carefully. According to the will, the property is transferred to you under a conditional clause. Rachel's confident smile started fading just a little. Okay. And the condition is what exactly? The lawyer paused. For a second the room felt very quiet. You know those moments where you can sense something important is about to be said, but you don't know what it is yet? That was the feeling. Mr. Whitaker continued. To maintain permanent ownership of the house, you must personally reside in the property for a continuous period of 12 months. Rachel blinked. 12 months? Yes. She shrugged. That's not a big deal. Then she looked at me again with a quick smirk. I mean, it's a free house. But the lawyer wasn't finished. There are additional terms. Rachel sighed loudly. Of course there are. The lawyer continued reading. During the 12-month residency period, the owner must maintain full financial and physical responsibility for the property. Rachel waved her hand. Fine. Property taxes. Utilities. I get it. But again, the lawyer shook his head slightly. Maintenance as well. Rachel frowned. What kind of maintenance? The same responsibilities your father handled while he owned the property. Something about the way he said that made me think of all the little things I had done around the house for the last 3 years. Fixing broken cabinet hinges. Cleaning gutters. Shoveling snow in winter. Handling plumbing issues. Tasks Rachel had never even seen. Still, she didn't seem worried. How hard could that be, she said. Then she crossed her arms confidently. So basically, I just live there for a year. Yes, the lawyer said. And then I can sell it? Mr. Whitaker looked down at the final paragraph. Well, that depends. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Depends on what? The lawyer slowly turned the page again. The last page. The page that had been added separately. The one Dad apparently wrote himself. You see, Mr. Whitaker said carefully, your father included one final sentence regarding the transfer of ownership. Rachel leaned forward again. Now she was curious. Okay, what does it say? The lawyer cleared his throat, looked directly at Rachel, and began reading the final line that would completely change the meaning of everything she had just heard. Have you ever watched someone realize, in real time, that the victory they were celebrating isn't actually a victory at all? That moment where confidence slowly drains from their face. Where the room suddenly feels smaller. Heavier. That's exactly what happened next. Because when Mr. Whitaker said there was one final sentence, Rachel still looked relaxed. In her mind, the story was already finished. She had the house. Everything else was just legal wording. But sometimes a single sentence can flip an entire situation upside down. Mr. Whitaker adjusted the page and began reading. Rachel Carter will inherit the property located at Pine Ridge Drive under the condition that she personally resides in the home for 12 consecutive months. Rachel nodded. Right, we covered that part. But the lawyer lifted a hand gently. There is an additional clause. Rachel sighed dramatically. Okay, what now? And that's when he read it. Slowly. Clearly. As specified by David Carter, if Rachel Carter declines or fails to personally reside in the home for 12 continuous months, full ownership of the property will immediately transfer to my daughter, Emily Carter. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence where people are just thinking. The kind where everyone is suddenly processing the same thing at the same time. Rachel blinked. Once. Twice. Then she leaned forward in her chair. Wait, what? Mr. Whitaker calmly repeated the line. If the residency condition is not fulfilled, the house becomes Emily Carter's property. Rachel stared at him like she had misheard. That doesn't make any sense. The lawyer slid the document slightly across the desk. You're welcome to read it yourself. She grabbed the page quickly. Her eyes moved across the sentence. And that confident smile she walked in with? Gone. Just like that. But I don't even live in the city, she said. Mr. Whitaker nodded. I'm aware. Rachel looked at me briefly, then back at the lawyer. So you're saying if I don't move into that house for a full year? Yes. She gets it? Yes. The word hung in the air like a heavy weight. Rachel leaned back slowly. This is ridiculous. Her voice had changed now. Not confident. Not relaxed. Sharp. You're telling me Dad set it up so the house goes to her unless I basically rearrange my entire life? The lawyer didn't react emotionally. He simply opened another envelope in the folder. There is also a letter your father asked me to provide once the will was read. Rachel crossed her arms. Oh, great. A letter. Mr. Whitaker slid the envelope toward the middle of the desk. But he didn't hand it to Rachel. He looked at me instead. Your father addressed this to both of you. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I reached forward and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dad's handwriting. Messy, but unmistakable. I swallowed and began reading. If you're hearing this letter, it means the house has already been mentioned in the will. Rachel leaned forward impatiently. Just get to the point. I kept reading. This home meant a lot to me. Not because of its value, but because of the life that happened inside it. I paused. The memories hit instantly. Christmas mornings. Dad repairing the kitchen cabinets. The smell of sawdust when he worked in the garage. Then I read the next part. Over the past few years, I've had a lot of time to think about what this house represents. Rachel tapped her fingers on the table. Okay, but I kept reading. And I realized something very simple. The room felt incredibly quiet now. The person who truly values a home is the person willing to care for it. Rachel rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. But the next lines changed the tone completely. I know exactly who spent time here when things were difficult. My voice slowed as I read. I know who drove me to appointments. Who fixed the broken sink. Who stayed awake during the nights when I couldn't breathe properly. Rachel stopped tapping the table. I continued. I also know who visited when it was convenient. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Dad's letter ended with one final message. So I created a simple test. The person who truly wants this home will be willing to live in it, maintain it, and protect it. I lowered the paper. The room stayed silent. Rachel stared at the desk. Then she looked up at the lawyer. So basically, he set me up. Mr. Whitaker shook his head. No. He gave you a choice. Rachel laughed bitterly. A choice? I live 2 hours away. My entire job is there. Then she looked at me again. You knew about this? I shook my head slowly. I didn't. And that was the truth. I had no idea Dad planned this. But suddenly all those strange moments started making sense. The meetings with the lawyer. The locked folder. The strange things he said late at night. Sometimes people show you who they really are when something valuable is involved. Rachel pushed the document away. This is insane. But the lawyer calmly folded his hands. The terms are completely legal. Rachel leaned forward again. So if I move into the house, pay the bills, do the maintenance. For 12 consecutive months, the lawyer confirmed. Then it's mine. Yes. Rachel sat back again. Thinking. Calculating. But something about the way she looked at the document told me she had already realized the problem. Because owning a house and actually living in it are two very different things. Especially when that house comes with responsibilities she had never handled before. After a long silence, she asked the question that revealed everything. So if I decide not to move in? Mr. Whitaker answered calmly. Then the property transfers to Emily. Rachel looked at me again. Not smiling this time. Not confident. Just staring. And in that moment, it became very clear she had never planned to live in that house at all. She had only planned to sell it. But now the situation was completely different. Because the house wasn't just an inheritance anymore. It was a decision. And the choice Rachel made next would decide everything. So what would you do? That's the real question. Imagine sitting in that chair like Rachel was. Realizing the thing you thought you had already won was suddenly hanging by a thread. Would you fight for it? Would you walk away? Or would you try to prove something? Because in that quiet office, after the lawyer finished explaining the clause, Rachel didn't say anything for a long time. She just stared at the document. Then she laughed. Not the confident laugh she had earlier. This one sounded forced. So basically, she said, Dad made this into some kind of test. Mr. Whitaker folded his hands calmly. You could interpret it that way. Rachel looked at me again. Her eyes were sharp now. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I shook my head. I didn't even know about it. And that was true. The entire thing caught me off guard. I never asked for the house. Never expected it. For 3 years I lived there because someone had to. Not because I thought it would lead to an inheritance. But suddenly the house wasn't just Rachel's anymore. It was a decision she had to make. Move in for a full year. Handle everything herself. Or walk away. Rachel stood up from the chair and paced a few steps across the office. You realize my job is 2 hours away, she said to the lawyer. Yes. And my apartment lease just renewed. Mr. Whitaker nodded again. The clause does not require immediate residency. You have 30 days to begin. Rachel rubbed her forehead. This is unbelievable. Then she turned to me again. So you just get the house if I say no? Only if the residency requirement is not fulfilled, the lawyer replied. Rachel sat back down slowly. And for the first time since the meeting started, she looked unsure. Because suddenly the house wasn't easy money anymore. It was work, bills, maintenance, responsibility, all the things that come with actually living somewhere. The meeting ended a few minutes later. Rachel left quickly. She barely looked at me on the way out. But the story didn't end there. Because over the next few weeks, Rachel tried to make the plan work. At least at first. She told the lawyer she would move in. She said she'd figure out the commute. She said it was only 1 year. And technically, she did move into the house. But here's the thing about reality. It doesn't care about plans. The first problem showed up almost immediately. The commute. 2 hours in the morning. 2 hours back in the evening. 4 hours in the car every single day. Then came the house itself. Because houses, especially older ones, constantly need attention. The gutters needed cleaning after a storm. The water heater started making strange noises. The backyard fence had a loose section that needed repair. Things Dad used to fix. Things I handled during the years I lived there. But Rachel had never dealt with any of that. One afternoon, Mrs. Helen Brooks saw Rachel struggling with a stuck garbage bin near the driveway. She walked over to help. Your sister used to handle that every week, Helen said casually. Rachel didn't answer. Another time the lawn grew too high because Rachel forgot to schedule a mower. Neighbors noticed. The house slowly started looking different. Less cared for. More neglected. And every time something broke or needed fixing, Rachel had to deal with it herself. No quick visits. No leaving after 2 hours. Just the reality of living there. 2 months passed. Then something interesting happened. Rachel called me. It was the first time we spoke since the will reading. Her voice sounded tired. I have a question, she said. Okay. If I decide not to continue living here, the house goes to you immediately, right? Yes, she sighed. You'd actually want it? The question surprised me. I looked around my apartment while thinking about the answer. I lived there for 3 years, I said. It already feels like home. She didn't respond right away. Then she said quietly, yeah, I guess it does. Another week passed. And then Rachel made her decision. She moved out. Just like that. No dramatic announcement. No argument. She simply informed the lawyer that she wouldn't be continuing the residency requirement. And legally, that ended the condition. 2 weeks later, I walked back into the house on Pine Ridge Drive. This time not as a caregiver. Not as someone temporarily staying, but as the official owner. The lawyer handed me the final paperwork. All conditions have been fulfilled, Mr. Whitaker said. I nodded. Then I stepped inside the house alone. And for a moment, everything felt quiet. The living room looked exactly the same. Dad's old chair near the window. The hallway where I used to help him walk slowly to the kitchen. The small scratch on the wall from when we moved a couch years ago. Memories everywhere. And suddenly I understood something Dad probably knew long before any of this happened. The house was never really about money. It wasn't about who was loved more. It was about who was willing to stay. Who was willing to take care of something when it became difficult. Before he passed away, Dad once said something that confused me at the time. Not everything that looks unfair actually is. Now I understood what he meant. Because from the outside, Rachel inheriting the house looked unfair. But the last page of the will told a completely different story. And sometimes the truth about a family doesn't show up until the very last sentence. Now I'm curious about something. If you were in Rachel's position, would you have stayed for the full year? Or would you have made the same decision she did? Let me know what you think. And if you've ever seen a will reveal someone's true character, I'd really want to hear that story too. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one the ending was written for.